They must have made a mistake. Why else would I have been invited to this school? My presence at this place was due to the grace of a silent patron. When the counselors came to find me, they kept using that term, silent patron. On the day, I felt like it was a weird ritual, like some kind of spell that commanded them to use that term. They refused to call it anything other than that, no matter how much I pried. It wasn't until my first day at the crater that I realized everyone had silent patrons. It was just part of how this school operated. I was told it was a great honor. On my second day, I realized that I was the one who made a mistake. It was when we were doing something called growth testing. The idea was to see where we started, and then, at the end of 6 months, we would be tested again to see how much we'd grown. I was told to arrive at 2 p.m. in a field. When I asked which field, I was told that it wouldn't matter. I didn't really understand, but I took those words at face value. I left my room, locked the door, walked down the hallway. The decorations were sparse, but that seemed to be intentional. I think the school wanted us to feel a sense of simplicity in everything. Strength is simple. There was another one of those terms they kept using. I keep meaning to ask why they're so particular about their words, but I'm not really sure how to phrase my question. That, and I hadn't actually met any teachers yet. A series of tired-looking counselors in granite gray robes, giving me instructions, telling me to go this way, to sit over there, to listen to this person. I was starting to wonder when the teaching would start when I arrived in a field. There were exactly 9 other people in the field when I arrived. Most of the other students watched me as I walked to the semicircle we were standing in. 2 of the students didn't even seem to notice I'd arrived. There was a woman sitting in front of the group, her eyes fluttering as she spoke. I tried to make out what she was saying, but before I could, she looked at me and said, "Hey, welcome. Can I get your name for roll call?" I looked at her and said, "Marcus, ma'am." A chuckle and slight smiles from the group. "Oh, please. Ma'am was my mother. Professor Stick will do just fine, yeah?" Her smile seemed more earnest, but she seemed to be expecting a response, so I nodded. Satisfied, she clapped her hands, turned to the group, and said, "All right, folks. That makes 10 students, which means we can get this testing underway." She started to pace. "Now, raise your hand if you know what growth testing is," she said. I was one of 2 people who didn't raise their hands. She looked around the group, muttering to herself for a bit, then said, "All right, not a problem. Marcus and Erica, do me a favor and come here. I'll get you up to speed." A girl from the group and I stepped forward, and the professor said, "So I can build a mental link with you both, or I can just explain it. Up to you." The professor looked at my face for a second and said, "A mental link is something that I can use to give you access to a specific lesson. It's instant, and I can't use it unless you agree to it. Do you want to do it or not?" I couldn't believe how casually she said that. A direct link into my mind? Whether I agree or not, that's a wild piece of magicks. And was it a matter of her not being able to impart the knowledge without my agreement? Or not wanting to? Before my mind could race about the possibilities, the woman beside me said, "Can you just explain it? Mental links fade pretty quickly for me." Interesting. I hadn't even thought about the possibility that something like that could interact differently for different people, but I guess it made sense. "Sure," the professor said. She proceeded to explain the concept I mentioned earlier, and I'm honestly not sure why she thought we would need a complex knowledge transfer for something so simple. When we walked back towards the group, their in-talking had ended, and the professor started again in a loud voice. "It doesn't matter which of the schools you're following. You'll need to test for everything today. So, first up is control magicks. I'm just going to start in order, going down the line," she muttered as she looked out in the field. It was a gray day, but there was a tinge of blue in the air, a sign that spring was around the corner. She looked over at a student that was looking behind us and said, "Elric, would you like to start? The sooner you show us what you can do, the sooner you can get back to staring at nothing." The student seemed to register he was being spoken to, but there was something off about his eyes. I realized that he wasn't just looking at nothing earlier. He was actively looking around, not focused on anything in particular as he moved. His head and eyes shifted from side to side as he walked out into the sands towards the water. "Just give me a sign when you're," she started. Elric cut her off and said, "Ready." She gave a slight, acknowledging head nod, as if accepting that she shouldn't have even bothered to ask. Her eyes started fluttering again as she swept a hand across her neck. She was speaking again, and I initially thought it was gibberish or some magic's tongue, but watching her more closely, I realized that it was like her words were tied directly to her hand movements. I couldn't tell which started the process and which ended it, but it did end, and when her eyes were done fluttering, the field was filled with people. I dialed my eyes up and realized they were copies of her. Some kind of duplication spell? She took a seat while her clones circled Elric. If it was duplication magics, it was the best I'd ever seen. Each clone looked exactly like her, and they were all speaking in different timings. She must have granted them temporary sentience. Was that even allowed anymore? Elric was still looking around when the first clone started to run towards him in his blind spot. The clone was about halfway to him when the tendril erupted from his back, attaching itself to her. He breathed a sigh of relief, almost like he felt like something interesting had started. I was having a hard time placing his level of awareness, frankly. The clone was rattled by the impact, but went to reach for the tendril. It didn't manage to bring its arms together before all the clones melted into a black ink. The professor raised their voice again, saying, "That's good. Thank you. Moving on to the power test." I'll be honest, I'm not sure how any of that was supposed to be a test that demonstrated control. But clearly, everyone else was satisfied, because I seemed to be the only lost person on the field. And just like that, the professor was casting another spell. I kept trying to understand what she was doing, but it didn't seem like there was much to learn. She was casting an incantation, I could tell that much. It's possible she was channeling something, but between the hand gestures, the strange, disordered speech, and the smoke trail following her fingers, I was having a hard time deciphering any of it. The sky went black. Well, not black exactly, more like overcast. Like something was... I looked up and saw an enormous black sphere suspended in the air above us. I closed my mouth, which I hadn't realized had opened out of shock, as I tried to figure out what kind of spell could possibly make that happen. Summoning? Did she create that thing? She called out to Elric again. "Say when, buddy," she yelled over to him. What exactly is he supposed to do? Drill a hole through it? Elric hadn't looked up at the massive structure directly, as far as I could tell, but he looked like he was smiling. It was a slight smile, faint, and it was more of an excitement across his face than anything else. From what I could tell, anyway. I was having a hard time reading him. "Yes," he responded in a normal tone. I barely heard him. The professor didn't do anything visually, but the building-sized sphere started to fall like its strings had been cut, quietly building speed. I took a step back and started thinking about how the rest of the class would handle this when I saw it. He looked up, and I swear he started panting. Those black tendrils appeared again. This time, they seemed to be pumping out of his entire body. They were shooting straight up at the sphere, from his arms, his legs, chest, and back. It was like they were propelled out of him. Eventually, they made contact with the sphere mid-descent. The sphere, unsurprisingly to me, wasn't slowing at all. If the tendrils were resisting, it didn't look like it was working. Wait, so is the sphere just going to crush him? I knew that this place had a reputation for intensity, but killing a student on the first day seemed insane, even by magicks society standards. The tendrils kept pouring out of him, what must have been miles and miles of black, thick ropes. Was he panicking? No, he didn't even move. He just kept letting that stuff pour out of him. The sphere was getting closer and closer, but no one else seemed worried. I must be missing something, but what? I took my eyes off Elric's tendrils and focused on the sphere. Wait a minute, was it shrinking? I hadn't noticed it at first. There were layers and layers of tendrils on the sphere, but I could tell it was getting smaller. Oh, he was destroying it. That actually made a lot more sense. Why try to catch a massive weight when you can just destroy it in midair? Nothing to catch by the end of that. And just like I expected, there was no impact. The sphere was completely gone before it even got close to the guy. Wow, okay. The professor started walking towards Elric. Hey, bud, wait right there for me, yeah? What an outrageous ability. Was everyone at this school like this? I didn't even hear him destroying the thing. That's a pretty impressive feat. His tendrils all returned to his body as the professor spoke to him about something, and I made a note of the fact that his tendrils seemed to have physical mass. They didn't just disappear when he didn't need them. That's an interesting wrinkle and could be useful to know. The professor and Elric walked back to the group together, with Elric a few steps behind her until he rejoined our semicircle. The professor sighed, looked out into the crowd, and asked, Right, can anyone tell me how Elric dealt with the weights I provided? No one spoke up, which was surprising to me. The answer seemed obvious, wasn't it? I waited a beat before saying, He just destroyed it. He doesn't have to catch the weight if there's nothing left. A couple puzzled looks from the crowd, and a gentle, Not exactly. Anyone? From the professor followed. Wait, what? It clearly wasn't there by the end. What else could he have done? He absorbed the weight somehow, said another student. I'm sorry, absorbed? That giant rock is inside him right now? That's actually crazier than the silent destruction bit, and not really possible. Mass has to be converted somehow, doesn't it? Right, but how did he absorb the weight? The professor said. That's absurd. It shouldn't be possible. Which I now realize is why no one was answering the question initially. They knew he'd absorbed the weight, somehow, but they couldn't figure out what the secret to his trick was. But the professor must know, unless she's just fishing. I looked over at Elric, who wasn't looking at our group at all. He was back to his scanning head movement and darting eyes. It was like he was looking for something, but I couldn't imagine what that was. The professor wasn't letting us off the hook that easily. Okay, so if we can't absorb mass into ourselves, she said, where else can we store? A girl with blonde hair speaks up. His vines. I think I liked tendrils better, but she was right. They were more vine-like. Very good. And why does that work? Said the professor. She kept leading us towards answering, gesturing with her hands like she was conducting us into providing the right response. Recreation transfer. A few students muttered in different tones. Exactly. When we can't transfer mass into a physical space directly, we can turn it into something else. Also doesn't hurt to have an essence spell that moves through physical space like Elric's does. Right, buddy? She spoke in Elric's direction, but she'd completely lost his attention by this point. She recovered quickly, looking at the class and saying, Why don't each of you pair up and talk about some different recreation transfer techniques you can use? The professor clapped her hands, and that seemed to be the cue for all of us to partner up. I was thinking about what I could even say to my partner, knowing nothing about recreation transfer, when the professor said, in a lowered tone, Marcus, can I borrow you for a second? She motioned towards herself gently. I wasn't sure how to handle the partner bit if I was going to be talking to her right away, but I figured I'd deal with that later. I jogged over to her as she walked a bit further away from the class. Yeah? I said. You answered earlier the whole destroyed thing? She said. Oh, that. I was worried that it was something serious. Oh, yeah, I just assumed he must have destroyed it. I don't really know much about recreation magics. I was a bit confused why we needed to talk about this now. Maybe she wanted to give me a tip? Her brow furrowed. She was silent for a few seconds, and then looked like she was choosing her words carefully. It's just, well, that was a standard recreation spell, so. I mean, it's gotta go somewhere, right? I muttered something about not getting a good look at the spell when it was being cast. She nodded through my mumbling and gave me a slight smile as I petered out. We'll talk more later, yeah? She said. As I started to respond, she turned back toward the group and started walking. I followed a few steps behind her, the glare of the sun in my eyes, and rejoined the group.